Hi, welcome back to Educator.com. This lesson is the big picture of environmental science. So we've got to talk about types of systems. We talk about systems a lot in environmental science, so here are some examples. Closed systems have no energy/material transfer in or out. It stays the same. You can think about a closed system as this balloon. If we take one of these toy balloons and put helium in it and tie it tight, it's going to stay that way for a very long time. Now, obviously, there's going to be a gradual leakage of gas, but for that time being, it's just as it is. Nothing's going in, nothing's going out. So a closed system is typically hypothetical. In nature, in reality, it's rare for there to be a completely closed system. For practical purposes, we'll consider the Earth as a whole, the biosphere and everything inside the Earth, all the atmosphere, everything, as being a closed system. Now, in reality, can certain molecules go into space and certain things come out of space in Earth? Yes. But for all practical purposes in this course, we'll consider Earth as a whole a closed system. Open systems. Now, when we talk about systems in nature, inside of planet Earth, in terms of where the biosphere is, that's a common thing. There's some energy/material moving in and out. So open systems, there is a response to inputs and outputs. And like I was suggesting, with something being put in and having some kind of change and maybe it's waste, something come out of it. Hot air balloons are an example of an open system. There definitely is a change that occurs when you input, the making of heat and that pressure and heat change to make the balloon rise. That's what you can consider to be an open system as opposed to this toy balloon here. Now, a static system can be open, but it's in a fixed condition, meaning stuff goes in, stuff goes out, but it remains the same. It ends up being unchanged in the long run. Classic or classical stability and equilibrium can be related to that. For instance, if you look at a grandfather clock with its pendulum just staying where it is and just not moving, it's in a state of equilibrium. If I push it so it moves back and forth, for a while, the laws of physics are going to make it so that, it's moving back and forth, and it will gradually lose how far it's swinging back and forth because of friction in the air, those air molecules affecting it. And over time, it will just get back to that steady state in the middle and eventually not be moving. So it will return to that place where it was, which we can call equilibrium. So a static system, you can put stuff in, but in the long run, it just ends up staying the same. That's also not very common in terms of long-term environmental science. Now, a dynamic system, it changes over time. I mean, we've seen evidence of that in geology, in terms of how evolution has affected life, and geology related to that. Over time, stuff changes. So with a dynamic system, you're going to see that come up a lot in environmental science. Certain inputs and certain outputs cause changes where it's not static in the long run. All right, open systems. So when we talk about systems in this course, it's going to be open. So it does apply to all the examples that are going to come up. And there are two major types of open systems. So with a steady state open system, the inputs and outputs are equal. So you can think of it this way. If there's a forest that somebody owns, it's their property. If they cut down a tree, to use for lumber or whatever, and they plant a tree to replace it, that is a steady state system. For every tree we subtract, we add another one. So in the long run, the inputs and outputs, they even out. However, non-steady state is not that. It's unequal. So if we end up chopping down a bunch of trees and don't replace them at the proper rate to make sure it stays even, that's definitely unequal in terms of inputs and outputs. And you could run into some trouble, obviously, with non-steady states. Where it's going as an ecosystem or that terrain could be unpredictable. Balance of nature. So when it comes to balance of nature and dynamic equilibrium, this is a concept that comes up a lot in all kinds of sciences, biology and environmental science. So nature does have a way of balancing itself out in the long run. As humans, we can try to control that and try to force nature to be balanced, but sometimes there are certain factors that are beyond our control. It could be that over time, a lake is going to dry up and there's very little we can do about it. And we could try to transport lots of water there. We can try to get other rivers flowing to it. But in the long run, if the environmental conditions aren't fitting for maintaining that lake volume, it may be beyond our control. This image here is a classic kind of symbol for dynamic equilibrium. It's an equal sign, but with arrows drawn into it. So you see that a lot in chemistry in terms of products leading to reactants and vice versa. You can use that analogy. You can compare it to environmental science and systems as well. Something else we need to consider in terms of inputs and outputs is residence time. So there's a calculation, ART, average residence time. So I'm going to give you an example of how that's calculated. So let's take the Gavins Point Dam. So it's the last dam in the flow of the Missouri River. It's small compared to some of the other ones that are upstream. But the Gavins Point Dam, if we wanted to calculate the average resident time of water in that dam, because we do have a flow of water into it and water leaving and eventually going downstream further, we can calculate that. So here's how it works. ART, average residence time, equals S divided by F. So S is the size, like how much volume is in terms of the water in that dam is there. And then F is the rate of transfer. And I'll give you some actual numbers here so we can calculate it. Oftentimes, like if you're measuring a volume of water, you'll see this term that's, they call it acre feet as an amount. We can actually convert that through a calculation to kilometers cubed, cubic kilometers. It's like saying, cubic centimeters, but it's obviously a lot bigger, 1,000 meters, kilometer, and then to the third power. So that is a volume measurement. So let's say that for the size, like I said, it's a small dam. For the size of it, we're going to say it's 0.6 cubic kilometers in terms of like the amount that's stored at any given moment. And then the rate of transfer in terms of how much water is actually flowing through there per year ends up being 31 cubic kilometers per year. And that equals, if we do the calculation, 0.6 divided by 31, 0.019 per year, or out of the year. This is what I meant to say. So 0.019, or as close to 0.02 out of a year, that equals approximately 7 days. So 7 days is close to 0.02 in terms of how much of a year we're talking about. Now, if we had a much bigger dam, it'd be a different number. Instead of 0.6 cubic kilometers or acre feet would be a different number. If we were talking about the, what's the name of the dam? It's another dam that's upstream on the Missouri River, also starts with a G, but it's much larger. So we would see a bigger number here up top, and the total number of days would actually be a lot more. There's a dam upstream where the ART is actually 347 days. So it's a very different number, and you can see that relative to the size of the dam, this flow gives you a particular average residence time that's a little bit different. Why is this important to calculate? Well, it's nice to know how long things are kind of hanging out in a certain area. When it comes to actual harmful chemicals that could be in the water, like MTBE. So there have been laws passed so that this is no longer used in fuel, because we've realized as MTBE gets into the environment, it can cause a lot of damage in terms of it getting into the water supply and ending up in fish and other organisms, and then that could end up getting into us if we eat those substances. So calculating ART for something that's in the water or the water itself can be very revealing about the rate in terms of how much is flowing in and how much is flowing out. All right, feedback. Feedback occurs when the output of a system has some kind of effect on its input. And this is a good diagram here. We have something that's causing A to accumulate a product, to lead to some kind of end. And then that product accumulation leads to, inevitably, the shutting off of the formation of that product, or it can actually encourage it, it can increase it. And so those are different types of feedback, rather. So two kinds. Negative feedback, which happens a lot in the human body, is where an increase in output leads to a later decrease in input. So let me highlight that for you. Decrease in input. So take an AC system. If you say, hey, I want it to be 22 degrees Celsius in here. If it's currently 25 degrees Celsius, well, it's going to release cold air into the room until it reaches the point where you have 22 degrees, and then that, sensing it, will shut it off. It'll stop releasing cold air until, hey, if it eventually gets warmer, it'll release cold air until it gets to that point, which then will shut it off. So that end product cooling down the area inside the room is going to shut off the mechanism. This happens a lot in the human body. If you eat something that's full of sugar, well, insulin is going to be released from your pancreas to get that sugar packaged away into your cells out of your bloodstream. Well, you only want to release insulin so long as you need it. So the drop in blood sugar exiting the bloodstream, turns off the release of insulin, and that is a negative feedback. It happens in nature too. So we see that a lot in environmental science. Positive feedback is an increase in output leading to a further increase in output. It just keeps encouraging it. You can think of a forest fire as being positive feedback, that when a small part of the forest starts burning, it can actually make neighboring trees dry out and actually be more likely to actually get a little ember lighting them on fire, and it spreads and spreads and spreads and spreads and spreads until there's no more forest. So the worsening of a forest fire, you can think of as positive feedback. When it comes to city populations, you can actually think of it in two different ways. So here's another way that you can make sense of negative versus positive feedback. In terms of a city population actually having more and more and more people moving in, positive feedback, it can work like this, where people move into an urban area, are part of that economic process, which leads to prosperity because those people are helping to build new buildings, bring in products, manufacturing, resources are coming into that area, encouraging more people to want to move there because it's profitable and it's prosperous. And then that could lead to more and more people coming in. So that could be a positive feedback in terms of encouraging more and more people to move into an area. However, you could also have negative feedback depending on the actual situations. For instance, if more and more people are coming into an area and it's actually making it harder to use the resources that are available, and it gets overcrowded and it gets dirty and there's more crime and maybe more spread of disease, it could work in the opposite way, where you actually have people leaving. That increase in population could actually end up shutting it down in terms of the people coming in, or lead to the opposite effect, people leaving. So negative feedback and positive feedback both occur in nature. It really just depends. Types of flows. So when it comes to flow, flow versus flux, two different things. So flow is actually the amount transferred and flux is a little bit different. Flux is the rate of transfer per unit time. Sometimes a flow can be in flux because as time goes on, it actually is changing in terms of how much it's increasing or decreasing. So when it comes to types of flows, a linear flow or linear process is depicted like this. So if you were to graph it and it's a straight line and it just keeps going straight, whether it's a decrease or an increase, if that slope is constant, we can consider that linear. For instance, if you have a bunch of oranges that are all approximately the same mass, every time I add one orange to the scale, the total mass increases by the same increment, regardless of how many oranges. That's a linear flow. A nonlinear flow would be if every time I add a new one, it really changes the scenario. I've heard of this as like drinking a glass of water. So you're thirsty, so you drink a glass of water, and you feel a little bit better. If you keep drinking a glass of water, it's not the same exact effect on the body every time you drink a glass of water. Yes, you're adding the same amount of water into your body every time, but in terms of how that affects your body, in terms of its ability to process that amount of fluid, get rid of that amount of fluid, and not be sort of drowned in fluids and affecting, osmotic potentials and so on and so forth, that could be nonlinear. So anytime you have a graph that's not going straight, if it's changing over time, that's definitely other than linear. Lag time, delay between cause and appearance of an effect. So lag time could be something like this. If a group of people are chopping down trees for lumber, they're clearing away all kinds of vegetation, brushes, shrubs, grasses, and trees. Over the long run, that could lead to soil erosion, where it's more likely for parts of the land to be washed away, blown away, falling down, and that could cause people problems in those areas. But you know what? At first, when they first clear away all the vegetation, it's not obvious that it's been eroded. It may take the next big rainfall or flood before people are like, oh my God, this is a problem. That's now obvious. So that's a lag time between actually, the cause of the erosion, which was getting rid of all that plant life, because the roots and the plant life embedded in the earth makes it less likely to erode. But the appearance of that effect didn't come until maybe months or years later. So this is an example of lag time, and it's something to keep in mind with environmental science. Sometimes the effects are not immediately obvious to us. And then with curves, this relates to the previously mentioned material, linear versus exponential. So this is linear flow, as I mentioned before. So exponential is one of these graphs. You can see that as time goes on, the rate of increase is just, it's going up and up and up. This is exponential growth getting less and less as time goes on. And sometimes it won't reach zero. Sometimes it'll do what's called an asymptote. And an asymptote, it keeps getting closer and closer and closer, but will never reach that point, like zero, for instance. But it could. It just depends on what we're measuring. So these are exponential curves. And a logistic curve, sometimes called an S curve, whereas exponential is like a J curve. An S curve, it doesn't always look just like this. I mean, it could be a slight variation on it like that. But anyways, you do have this huge increase and then a plateau that follows, giving you that S. And I've seen this happen with the growing of protozoans or protists in a lab setting. So it could be paramecium, it could be amoebas, where you have a limited space for them to exist in, limited amount of resources on that petri dish or what have you. And at first, you get a little bit of growth, and then all of a sudden you have enough of them that are going through cell division and reproducing. We have a huge population increase, but then there's limited resources. There's only so much space, there's only so much gas available, there's only so much food for them to eat. And eventually you can get a tapering off in terms of the rate of increase. Overshoots, collapse, and consequences. So when it comes to overshooting, when it comes to populations, this is a major thing for sure. So I've drawn this for you before with the human population increase. Okay, so let's say with the human population increase, At first it's like this, and then boom, that J curve. If we exceed a certain point, let's say here, that's known as a carrying capacity. And here, if we get past it, we've overshot it. The carrying capacity, like it says here, is the amount that is supportable, the amount of people that can be sustained by the environment and all the resources that are there. Well, collapse can occur after the overshoot. And like I said, the example is this carrying capacity. What typically is going to happen is, yeah, you can go past it, but soon thereafter, famine, disease, lack of resources, lack of space, destruction of parts of the environment that we rely on could lead to a major collapse, a major drop in the amount of individuals. And that's something that we have to consider in terms of sustainability. So the consequences of that, reversible or irreversible, it really depends. There have been instances where humans have been close to extinction. There's fossil evidence of that, that there may have been situations where there was as little as like 1,000 people. And we're talking early on in human existence, because we've been around for close to 200,000 years. So we're talking a long time ago. But it could happen again where the consequences, hopefully they're reversible, that we can control the population growth after an overshoot and after this collapse. But sometimes the long-term consequences are irreversible. Extinction, complete destruction of an environment. Those things are hard to reverse. So soil erosion and harvesting old-growth forests. Sometimes soil erosion is reversible. Other times it's not. So you have cases where people have destroyed all the native plants to plant some kind of crop that's in high demand. And if you plant a crop that's not native to that area, and on top of that you use pesticides and you use certain chemicals to, you think, benefit the yield, you could permanently damage the soil to the point where nothing can be grown there again. That's an irreversible consequence. Harvesting old-growth forests. Old-growth forests have a lot of benefit. Not only have they been there for so long to the point where that you have this stability in terms of that ecosystem being there, but erosion is less likely to happen with those humongous trees and root systems. And also in terms of the organisms that call that place home, organisms that rely on that particular area. If you harvest an old growth forest, it may take a very long time to get back to that point. Maybe it is reversible, but it would involve us intervening and replacing those trees and maybe helping the animals get adjusted back into that environment. But there are consequences that we have to be careful of. Okay, Earth as a system. Environmental unity. This is a concept that's come up in the last few decades, that it's impossible to change just one thing and everything is interrelated. If you go in and try to help one species, or you're like, hey, we've got this problem, so let's say there's an invasive species, okay, a species that doesn't belong there and is destroying a lot of native plants in the area and throwing things out of balance. If we go in and we say, hey, we're going to add a predator that's going to eat up all of those insects, all of that invasive species, problem solved. Well, guess what? If you add that predator, they have their own needs and their own sort of niche that may not be in harmony with the environment. And that's happened before, where humans have introduced a predator to try to control the population of something that maybe is too abundant or is invasive. And that particular animal that we thought was the solution causes a whole different set of problems. So it's impossible to just go in and change one thing. And we're finding that the environment, it's all unified. It all is connected. And sometimes it's tough to see the consequences of our actions. Uniformitarianism. So this is the thought that geological and biological processes today are the same kinds that have occurred in the past. Now, the exact occurrences, they definitely vary, right? There have been times where there have been really intense volcanic eruptions that have decimated parts of the earth or led to the formation of new islands. we don't have that happening all over the world at once. Occasionally, yes, there are huge volcanic eruptions that can cause a problem. But what this is getting at is, like when we look at the rate of decay of radioactive isotopes, that's something that's predictable. And we know with the data we've accumulated that, hey, this is how this matter behaves. That's probably how it's been behaving all along. So even though the Earth has gone through different periods of warming and cooling, ice ages and such, the geologic and biological processes that we know of today, they've been happening. So that allows us to predict what may be happening in the future as certain things on Earth change. Another example about how things haven't always been the same despite this is we're very certain that in Earth's early atmosphere, there wasn't enough oxygen to support life as we know it today, especially something like aerobic respiration, which depends on oxygen. But because of processes that we know in terms of physical occurrences, biology and physics kind of coming together, we're very certain we know how oxygen ended up in the atmosphere and why it is that it's hung around today at the level that it's been at for so long. So the Earth hasn't been this static environment, but there are certain physical concepts that have been going on for as long as it's been here. And thanks to James Hutton, a Scottish gentleman from the 18th century, he was the first to really be a true proponent of uniformitarianism. And his writings impacted Charles Darwin in his understanding of geology, which of course helped him with his theory of natural selection or evolution. And just wanted to mention the Gaia hypothesis one more time. Life manipulates the environment for the maintenance of life. So Earth as a system, as far as we know it, could be encouraging life to stick around. Now, what life forms are actually here in 100 years, 1,000 years, 100,000 years, or a million years, it will change because the environment does change. But Earth is special in terms of supporting life. It's possible one day we may move to another planet, but it'll be a while because Earth is our home and we're supported here. Thanks for watching Educator.com.